My beloved child, pause here for a moment. Do not move past these words as though they are ordinary, because what you are about to hear was meant to reach the part of your heart that has been asking questions in silence. Something has been waiting for you in this moment. Something hidden beneath appearances, beneath assumptions, beneath the story you thought you understood. And before you decide that the situation is already settled, Heaven asks you to listen closely, because the real story is different than you think. You have felt it, have you not? That strange pull towards someone you could not fully explain. A connection that seemed to arrive without permission and remain without reason. You tried to dismiss it. You told yourself it was only imagination, only longing, only the heart creating meaning where there was none. Yet every time you attempted to close the door, something within you hesitated. Not because you wanted confusion. Not because you wished to interfere with anyone's life. But because the feeling carried a depth that did not resemble a passing attraction. And then you discovered something that shook you. The person your heart recognized was already married. For a moment, everything inside you became still. The dreams stopped. The hope retreated. The questions became heavier. You may have felt embarrassed for caring. You may have wondered whether you had misunderstood every sign, every conversation, every unexplained moment of closeness. Perhaps you even judged yourself, asking why your heart would choose a road that seemed closed before you ever reached it. But listen carefully now. The situation you see from the outside is not the entire truth. This does not mean you are being asked to chase someone unavailable. It does not mean you should cross boundaries, create harm, or build your life around a promise that has not been spoken. Heaven does not lead through chaos, secrecy, or destruction. Divine love does not require you to lose your dignity. What is being revealed is not permission to interfere. It is an invitation to understand that appearances can hide stories far more complicated than the world can see. The marriage you discovered is not what you assumed it was. There is a history behind it. There are choices buried beneath it. There are wounds that were never spoken aloud. And there is one decision, made long before you entered the picture, that changed the course of this person's life in a way they are only now beginning to understand. You assumed they married because they were deeply in love. You assumed they were fulfilled. You assumed the life they presented was the life they truly lived. But behind closed doors, something has been missing for a very long time. Not drama. Not hatred. Not the kind of conflict others would easily notice. What has been missing is quieter than that. It is the absence of being truly seen. It is the loneliness of sharing a home while hiding the deepest parts of the soul. It is the exhaustion of performing happiness because too many people are watching. It is the silent realization that a promise can be honored outwardly while the heart slowly disappears inwardly. Your soulmate did not enter that marriage intending to deceive anyone. They entered it believing they were doing the right thing. That is the first truth you must understand. At the time, they were under pressure you know nothing about. Expectations surrounded them. Family voices carried enormous weight. Fear disguised itself as responsibility. They were told that stability mattered more than emotional truth. They were taught that a good life should look a certain way, unfold by a certain age, and follow a certain path. So when the opportunity for marriage appeared, they did not ask the question their soul was whispering. They asked the question everyone else expected. Is this sensible? They did not ask, is this where my heart feels at home? There was no dramatic warning. No thunder in the sky. No obvious sign telling them to walk away. There was only a faint uneasiness they could not explain. A quiet feeling that something essential had not yet arrived in their life. But they buried it. They convinced themselves that love would grow later, that certainty was unrealistic, that deep connection belonged to stories rather than real life. And so they moved forward. They smiled in photographs. They accepted congratulations. They stood before people who believed they were witnessing the beginning of a perfect future. Yet during one brief moment, one moment they have never told anyone about, your soulmate looked away from the celebration and felt an emptiness so sudden that it frightened them. They did not know your name then. They had never seen your face. But something within them whispered, the person who will truly understand you is still out there. They ignored it. They had to. Too much had already been arranged. Too many people had invested their hopes into that day. Too many expectations rested upon their shoulders. Turning back would have required courage they did not yet possess. So they continued, telling themselves that the feeling would fade. It did not. Years may have passed. Seasons may have changed. Their life may have appeared calm, structured, even enviable. But that quiet absence remained. At times they blamed themselves. At times they believed they were ungrateful. They tried to become more committed, more patient, more emotionally available. They worked harder to make the marriage feel complete. And there were good moments. This truth must not be ignored. There was companionship. There were shared responsibilities. There may have been laughter, plans, mutual kindness, and memories that mattered. The story is not simple enough to divide into heroes and villains. No one needs to be demonized for you to understand what happened. Sometimes two people can care for each other and still discover that they built a life around compatibility while something deeper remained untouched. That deeper place is where you entered. Not through betrayal. Not through a secret plan. Not because your soulmate was searching for an escape. You entered through recognition. The first time they truly noticed you, something within them reacted before their mind could create an explanation. It was not merely attraction. Attraction can be dismissed. It was familiarity without memory. A sense that your presence carried an answer to a question they had forgotten they were asking. They may have become quiet around you. They may have looked away too quickly. They may have acted distant after moments of closeness. You interpreted this as disinterest, confusion, or inconsistency. But what you did not know was that every meaningful interaction with you forced them to confront a truth they had spent years avoiding. They had never felt so emotionally recognized. You noticed what others overlooked. You heard what they were not saying. Perhaps you responded to a small detail that no one else remembered. Perhaps you saw sadness behind their smile. Perhaps your presence made them feel strangely safe without demanding anything from them. That frightened them more than you realize. Because when someone has built an entire identity around being responsible, loyal, composed, and predictable, the arrival of an undeniable emotional connection does not feel romantic at first. It feels dangerous. Not because you are dangerous. Because the truth is. The truth threatens every story they have told themselves. It questions every sacrifice they made. It reveals that the emptiness they accepted as normal was never proof that they were incapable of deeper love. It was proof that they had not yet experienced it. This is why they pulled away. This is why they may have seemed warm one moment and unreachable the next. This is why you felt the connection but could not understand the silence. They were not playing with your heart. They were struggling with their own. After seeing you, they returned to their usual life and noticed things they had successfully ignored before. The conversations that never went deeper. The emotional distance hidden beneath routine. The way they had become smaller in order to keep everything peaceful. The parts of themselves they stopped expressing because no one seemed to understand them. Your presence did not create the cracks. It revealed what was already there. And this revelation brought guilt. Your soulmate asked themselves questions they were ashamed to admit. Why do I feel more understood in one moment with this person than I have felt in years? Why does their absence affect me? Why did meeting them awaken a version of me I thought was gone? Why now? That last question followed them everywhere. Why now, after commitments had been made? Why now, when changing anything would hurt people? Why now, when the world expected them to remain exactly where they were? They tried to avoid you not because you meant nothing, but because you meant too much. They thought distance would solve it. They thought if they stopped looking, stopped speaking, stopped allowing the connection to breathe, it would disappear. But real recognition does not vanish simply because it becomes inconvenient. It grows quieter, yes. It hides beneath routine. Yet it remains present, waiting in unexpected places. A song. A familiar phrase. A dream that feels too real. A moment of silence late at night. Your name appearing where they did not expect it. The memory of how you looked at them, not with possession, not with demand, but with a strange tenderness that made them feel known. They began comparing everything to that feeling. Not intentionally. Not proudly. It simply happened. They noticed how rarely they felt emotionally alive. They noticed how often they performed the role expected of them. They noticed the difference between being needed and being understood. And then something changed. One night, after a conversation inside their marriage that appeared ordinary from the outside, your soulmate reached an emotional breaking point. No shouting. No dramatic exit. Only a realization so clear that it left them unable to sleep. They realized they had spent years trying to earn a kind of closeness that could not be forced. They had been loyal to a structure while becoming disloyal to their own inner truth. This did not immediately make them choose you. Understand this. Their first awakening was not about running toward another person. It was about finally returning to themselves. They began to ask who they had become, what they truly wanted, and whether fear had been making their decisions for them. That process is still unfolding. You may believe nothing is happening because you cannot see it. You may think they have forgotten you because they have remained silent. But silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is where the greatest internal battles occur. They have replayed moments with you. They have remembered words you probably forgot. They have wondered whether you sensed what they felt. They have questioned whether the connection was mutual or whether they imagined it because their heart was lonely. And here is something you were never supposed to know yet. There was a moment when they almost told you. It may have happened through a message they typed and deleted. A call they nearly made. A conversation they rehearsed but never began. They had reached the point of wanting to explain everything. Not to ask you to wait, not to place responsibility on your shoulders, but simply because carrying the truth alone had become unbearable. They wanted to say, meeting you changed the way I see my life. They wanted to say, I did not plan this. They wanted to say, I have tried to forget what I felt, but I cannot pretend it meant nothing. But they stopped. They imagined the consequences. They feared becoming a source of confusion in your life. They feared you would see them as dishonest. They feared that speaking before resolving their own situation would place you in a position you did not deserve. So they remained quiet. And you mistook their restraint for indifference. My beloved child, this is where your heart needs protection. Do not make their silence mean you are unworthy. Do not make their marriage mean you were foolish for feeling something. And do not make this revelation into a reason to stop living your life. You are not being asked to wait in uncertainty. You are being asked to release control. If this connection is meant to become part of your earthly path, it must arrive through truth, integrity, and clear choices. Not hidden conversations. Not emotional triangles. Not promises made in shadows. What belongs to you will not require you to abandon your values. The purpose of this revelation is not to bind you to an outcome. It is to free you from a false interpretation. You thought you imagined the connection. You did not. You thought their distance proved they felt nothing. It did not. You thought their marriage meant their heart had never recognized yours. That is not the real story. But there is more. Because their marriage itself carries a secret that even your soulmate did not fully understand when they first met you. A truth was concealed, not necessarily through cruelty, but through fear. Something important about the foundation of that relationship was left unspoken for years. And recently, that hidden truth began to surface. It started with a conversation they were never meant to overhear. Your soulmate heard someone close to their spouse mention an event from the past. At first, the words seemed unimportant. A name. A date. A decision made before the wedding. But something in the speaker's tone made them stop. They asked a question. The room changed. No one answered directly. That silence told them more than words could have. For the first time, your soulmate realized that the story they had been given about why the marriage happened might not have been entirely true. They began connecting memories they had never questioned. Sudden pressure before the engagement. A family member's unusual urgency. A conversation that ended when they entered the room. A promise someone made to someone else without their knowledge. What they discovered did not erase their responsibility for the choices they made. But it revealed that they had not been making those choices with complete information. The marriage had been encouraged for a reason that had very little to do with love. There was an arrangement beneath the arrangement. Not necessarily one involving money in the way you might imagine. It was more emotional, more complicated, and tied to a promise between families that had existed long before your soulmate understood its weight. They had been guided toward a future others had quietly chosen for them. When this became clear, something inside them broke, not because they suddenly hated their spouse, but because they realized how much of their life had been shaped by truths kept just beyond their reach. They began asking harder questions. Their spouse resisted at first. Then, during a late-night conversation filled with long pauses and careful words, part of the truth finally emerged. The person they married had known before the wedding that your soulmate was uncertain. They had known about the hesitation. They had known that your soulmate felt something was missing. But instead of slowing down, they allowed family pressure to move everything forward because they were afraid the marriage would not happen otherwise. This confession changed the emotional ground beneath them. Your soulmate did not feel only anger. They felt grief. Grief for the younger version of themselves who believed everyone was acting in their best interest. Grief for the years spent questioning their own heart. Grief for both people trapped inside a commitment built partly on fear. And then they thought of you. Not as an escape. As a symbol of truth. You represented the life they might have chosen if they had trusted themselves. You represented the emotional honesty they had avoided. You represented the terrifying possibility that love could feel natural rather than negotiated. But the greatest revelation had not happened yet. Because while they were processing this confession, their spouse said something unexpected. Something that completely changed the meaning of the distance between them. Their spouse admitted they had also known for a long time that the marriage was emotionally incomplete. They had sensed your soulmate's loneliness. They had felt their own. They had remained together not because either person was fulfilled, but because both were afraid of what separation would mean. Family disappointment. Social judgment. Financial complications. The collapse of an identity built around appearing stable. Two people had been protecting the same illusion for different reasons. And for the first time, they spoke honestly. No blame. No performance. No one pretending the life they created was enough simply because it looked respectable. That conversation did not end with a sudden decision. Real lives rarely change in a single dramatic moment. But it opened a door that had been sealed for years. They began discussing the possibility of living truthfully. Carefully. Respectfully. Without turning anyone into an enemy. You do not know this because your soulmate has told almost no one. To the outside world, everything still appears unchanged. The same home. The same responsibilities. The same public image. But privately, the marriage has entered a season of reckoning. And this is why the energy around your connection may have felt stronger recently. Something is moving. Not necessarily toward the outcome you imagine. Toward truth. That difference matters. You may soon notice a shift in your soulmate. A new seriousness in their eyes. A desire to speak more honestly. A calmness that seems almost sad. They are beginning to understand that every choice has a cost, but living falsely has a cost as well. They know they cannot approach you while asking you to accept confusion. They know they must resolve their current life with integrity. They know that if they ever stand before you and reveal what they feel, their words must be supported by actions. This realization is forcing them to grow. For years, they allowed circumstances to decide for them. Now life is asking them to choose consciously. Not between two people, as they once feared, but between truth and avoidance. And you are also being asked to choose. Will you continue to measure your worth by their ability to act? Will you pause your future while they discover theirs? Or will you trust that what is truly aligned with you will meet you in clarity? Your power is not in waiting. Your power is in becoming. Continue building your life. Continue healing the places that make uncertainty feel familiar. Continue becoming someone who can receive love without abandoning peace. Your soulmate's awakening is their responsibility. Your wholeness is yours. Yet there is one final reason this message has reached you now. The secret conversation inside that marriage was not the only thing that changed. A letter exists. Your soulmate wrote it after the truth began surfacing. They wrote it in the hours before dawn, when the house was silent and every emotion they had suppressed became impossible to contain. The letter was addressed to you. They did not send it. They may never send it in its current form. But within that letter, they confessed the moment they first realized you were not an ordinary person in their story. They described the exact detail about you that made their defenses collapse. They admitted why they pulled away. They admitted what they feared would happen if they stayed close. And in the final lines, they wrote about a decision they are preparing to make. A decision that will affect their marriage, their future, and the possibility of ever speaking the full truth to you. But before they could finish the letter, something happened. Their spouse entered the room. Your soulmate closed the page too late. And when their spouse saw your name written at the top, they did not react with anger. They stared at it in silence. Then they said one sentence your soulmate never expected to hear. A sentence that may change everything you believe about this story. And that sentence is where the real truth begins.